I'm VJ Hamilton and welcome to the Autoimmune Reset, the place for you to learn how to thrive with autoimmune disease and feel empowered to take steps to transform your health to feel better than ever. You can start making changes today to improve your health. So with every episode, my mission is to share with you simple ways to up-level your diet and lifestyle with key learnings from my own journey reversing autoimmune disease and inspirational stories from those who have reset their autoimmune symptoms and are now thriving in life. I suffered from autoimmune disease for over 25 years and now I live symptom-free, and I wish the same for you as well. So thank you for being here and sharing this time with me. Now let's get started. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Autoimmune Reset podcast. I'm your host, VJ Hamilton. I'm a nutritionist, scientist, and expert in autoimmune disease. And today I'm really excited to have Dr. Christine Schaffner on the podcast today. Christine is a board certified naturopathic doctor and she has helped thousands of people to recover from chronic illness. She also has lots of online summits. She has her own podcast, which I certainly recommend checking out, The Spectrum of Health, and she has the Imminence Health Clinics as well. So thank you for being here, Dr. Schaffner. I'm so excited to have you. So yeah, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, VJ. I'm really happy to be here. And as we were talking offline, I think so many people just need more information and everyone really deserves to heal and feel good in their body. So I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, 100%. So where I like to start is to understand a bit more about your background, what led you into this area of work, and then we can talk a little bit more about what you do. And I know you've got a personal story to share even recently that's affected your health. So we'd love to hear from you because I think it really helps to set the scene when we hear more about you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. And just I always probably knew I was going to be a doctor. I grew up in a family of medicine and I, just really battled in my young years of what direction to go. But I found Bastyr University in Seattle, Washington, and I chose to become a naturopathic doctor. And that has been a really wonderful path for really meeting the chronic illnesses of today because there's so many systems that talk to each other and, really, of course, trusting that the body has this unique intelligence that is always trying to move towards health. And so when somebody is going through something, it's not just, trying to fix them like a mechanic, but really liberating that energy within all of us that drives us towards healing and really unpacking that on so many levels. I've had the amazing opportunity to work with so many patients and mentors, and I also not only specialized in naturopathic medicine, I've had some mentors in bioregulatory medicine that we can go in more depth, but has really led me to, no matter what patient comes in front of me, I really use that framework, and then it's just their unique story within that framework and how to really unravel like all of these layers that could be, just making them not feel good or have a label in modern health. And so I had always really taken care of my body and, just always tried to, walk the talk of what we all practice. And I went through a time period in my life where I know many people who are listening are maybe in that time period or, really starting this journey where I had just a number of stressors all at once. And the icing on the cake there was I actually was diagnosed with a benign brain tumor, and it was quite large and it was quite amazing that we found it in the time that we did. I actually had to go through a surgery, which again, being a naturopathic doctor who talks a lot about how to keep your brain healthy and detoxify, it was a really, kind of paradoxical experience, but it really transformed me in so many ways because a lot of the things that I was studying at that time within the realm of energy and group healing and the power of intention, visualization, meditation, I really feel that helped me to get the best outcome possible. And so, we might not always understand why we're going through something at the time, but I think we have all of these amazing, kind of intersection of where science is going and where we're kind of putting more language around the invisible forces of life, and how I really think that we can feel empowered and aligned to utilize that energy and that information no matter where you are in your healing journey. It's always available to you. And that really kind of was like a big learning experience for me. And a really, had a small daughter at the time, and it was a lot of trust and surrender and going through a lot of fear and my own things. But I had a really great outcome once I made that choice that I know I've been studying this. I know I can do this myself. And, at the end of the day, it's very empowering. So I come to this conversation with a lot of clinical experience, and also I've been on the other side of the table as well and had a very, intense healing journey, but I also had a very great outcome. And I really am a lot of people's cheerleaders, no matter what you're going through. There's a path and a timeline that you can have the best outcome for whatever you're going through.
Yeah, I thought that whole story around the brain tumor was incredible, really. And I think it brings in how medical intervention is so important, how the science is so important, but actually that spirituality piece and everything you went through around that really interested me and fascinated me.
Yeah.
So would you be able to touch on that? Because didn't your surgeon say something to you after you had it removed? Maybe go through that process and what you think might have contributed to it, because I
Yeah.
think it's quite hopeful. I work in my clinic and I share a lot on this podcast of people that have alopecia or they're living with, maybe multiple sclerosis or these other conditions. And I think visualization can be absolutely key to that.
Yeah.
And I think your story really highlights that as well.
Absolutely. So I actually was going through routine kind of a workup with a doctor. We've always wanted to have a bigger family, and I wasn't getting pregnant with our second as easily and keeping the baby because I was going through stress. And so my husband said, "Hey, why don't we go to a fertility doctor? We're not getting any younger. Let's just see." And I was like, again, it wasn't just this one thing. It was like all this other stress at that same time. And so I dragged my feet a little bit, but I finally did, what she asked of me, and I got an MRI. And then the following day, I met with the doctor, and she was really, fumbling over her words as she shared with me that I had this 3.2 centimeter, which if it's over 10 millimeters, it's a macroadenoma. So it was quite large, and it was
Yeah.
in the middle of my pituitary. So it was secreting hormones. It was pressing on my optic chiasm, and I was at risk for stroke at any time. It could have definitely shortened my life. And I was quickly referred to a neurosurgeon. And again, here I am like in shock and like, how could this, be my story, especially on top of everything I've been through. And, I was met with a really kind neurosurgeon, very skilled, very compassionate, which sometimes they get a bad rap because of how intense that field is. And I was comforted that he, knew exactly what was going on, that he'd done 400 of these a year, and that, it is actually a solvable condition, but you have to identify and treat it. And so I was definitely, going through this shock and denial, and then facing kind of what was ahead. And kind of simultaneously for a few years, it was during the pandemic, I was studying the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza, and I was really contemplating his kind of framework, especially how I could apply it to my patients. And he said something that really still rings true to me. He says, to change matter with matter takes time, but when you change the field, you change matter. And we can unpack that in so many ways of what that probably means. So I only had 2 weeks to prepare for the surgery. So nothing I did really physically would kind of show up to have an effect. Of course, I could support myself with nutrition or supplements, but it wouldn't, change really, my tumor, in 2 weeks. And so I totally leaned in. I want to empathize. I did have that moment, that feeling, I remember, of terror and fear and why me. And it was a quick and fleeting moment, but I felt it, and it was quite intense.
Yeah.
And I remember having a choice. I remember saying I could be in fear or victim. And, that can have a trajectory, or I could really utilize these tools that I've been learning. And it's kind of like a final exam, if you will, of what I was studying. And so I totally leaned in once I confronted that. And I have a dear circle of friends. We did intention circles. I was studying Lynn McTaggart's work at the time, so I had a intention circle that, preyed upon me. I signed up for coherence healing with Joe Dispenza, and I worked with a few energy healers. So it was really amazing. And then every day I would meditate and not only try to, feel, that connection that we all have, but also visualize the outcome, that I was going to have a great outcome. And it takes a lot of diligence to keep your mind on that, track. And so I remember getting wheeled into the operating room, and the nurse said, many people choose, the Versed that kind of knocks you out before you even see what's going on. And I said, I'm actually okay. And she kind of looked at me, and I took it all in. I was I was at peace before I went through anesthesia because of all the work and all the divine support I could feel that was around me. And I felt a lot of people praying for me that day. It was probably the only experience I've felt where that much energy and love was directed at me. And so, fast forward, I get through the surgery, and a month later, I went to the follow-up, and the surgeon, was looking, and he said, "Oh, everything looks good." And I asked him about the pathology report. I donated the tumor for study. It was at the University of Washington. And so I said, sure, they can study it. Kind of flippantly offhand, at the end, I was like, "Oh, what do you see?" And he said, "You know what? I'm going to be studying your tumor for a long time. It has all these different cell types. It's really unusual, but most of all, I want to understand why a tumor as large as yours came out so easily." And that was kind of part of our meditation to really, it was kind of large, and it could be sticky, and it could be hard to identify, but that it came out really easily. And so that was like a moment, I remember, like a validation, like what we did mattered, and again, I'm not, omniscient, but I do feel that, that was a sign from the universe that, we really need to lean into these aspects of healing that sometimes are an afterthought. They're not at the forefront of a protocol or a diagnosis. It's more kind of get on the conveyor belt of fear, the statistics. Especially with an autoimmune disease, there's always oh, there's no hope. We just have to manage it. And all of a sudden, you're just lumped into this, energy field that is really hopeless and, not supporting, the potential of what you could overcome. And so I really try to lean into that. I feel like, I'm in a chapter of my work that I'm still in contemplation and wanting to really integrate these principles more and more. Of course, I talk about them a lot in my practice, but I think, if you're a practitioner or if you're a patient out there, it's our job to also not only take our protocols and do, what we need to do, but also open ourselves up to really what, the magic of healing can be for all of us. And so, yeah, it's a really an exciting time. And I think our consciousness collectively is there too, that people want that. It's not just, we kind of talk in conferences. It's, we're able to talk and share about this more and more. So I'm excited. I think it's an exciting time.
Yeah, me too. I definitely think it's becoming more mainstream, which it should be really, because it's part of the package really.
Yeah.
And certainly something that I focus on with my clients as well. But talking about your clinic, I mean, that is an incredible story that you've just shared, and thank you for sharing that. But when we think about how you're helping your clients, I mean, I know you work by functional medicine principles, but what else are you bringing in? Because you offer quite a lot of different therapies, some that my audience might not have heard before. So it'd be interesting to talk about those and how you help people.
Yeah, absolutely. A colleague of mine that we're actually doing a joint venture, we're in the middle of creating, we're kind of creating this new term that we're thinking, it's called coherence medicine. And we can unpack that in a lot of ways. But we bring, all of these principles together again, no matter what illness you have, if you have Hashimoto's or lupus or any autoimmune labels, again, we're coming from the perspective that, again, your body is wise and there's something infecting that capacity for you to heal. And so we're looking at things that our bioregulatory mentors have taught us. So regulation is all about the terrain and how can we optimize and support our body on really, I would say, the level of toxicity, pathogens and how they affect the immune system and immune imbalances and trauma and how that can show up in the body. So that can be, whether you have a dental infection or still amalgam fillings, if you have chronic, infections in your sinuses or your tonsils, if you have scars that need to be treated. So we look on that lens. And then we are definitely big proponents of drainage, and drainage is all about allowing the, fluids in the body and the electrical system in the body and the energy of the body to flow without impedance, kind of this uninterrupted energy from inside the cell to the surrounding extracellular matrix, the lymphatics, the fascia, the water in the body, the blood, all of that. And then also, again, the organs of elimination, which I'm sure a lot of your patients already know, from the liver and the skin and the lungs and the colon and the kidneys and so forth, that we're moving and making sure that these areas are not overburdened by toxicity or pathogens or trauma, because emotions can be held in organ systems as well. So we do a lot of that. And then I really look at, principles of resonance, and I use bioresonance and also muscle testing in my practice. I kind of think about it of how do we pick the right layer through our own pattern recognition, but also employing these tools where we're dialoguing with the body and, finding that right layer at the right time with the right support. So for some people that could be treating SARS-CoV-2 and spike protein. For others, it could be parasites. For others, it's a mold detox. For others, it's really, metals and really getting toxins out of their connective tissue. There's a lot of layers there that we could spend a whole conversation on. And then I think about coherence in this idea of how do we add coherent information to the body? Because often my patients, not all of them, but many of them are very spiritual people, but when they're sick, they find that their connection is not as strong. They feel like they're kind of cut off, and that's a big part of feeling sick, right? Just feeling hopeless and down and not yourself, right? And so I think about how do we add coherent information to their system so their body starts to remember what that feels like. And so that can be light, that can be sound, that could be frequency, and that could be many, many things. And so kind of all the tools that we use to, do all of this, I use 2 bioresonance scans. One is, I use it because it's really easy and accessible, the AO scan, and then the other one is the Energy for Life. There are many ones out there. I have a lot of respect for a lot of the German and Russian equipment, but they can be time consuming. So I found that these are pretty accessible, especially in a Zoom world where a lot of people are remote. Yeah. And I do a form of muscle testing that is really amazing, that we can talk with the autonomic nervous system and the fascia to understand where there's stress and what will alleviate that stress and what layer to work on. And it also opens us up to our intuition and trusting how to utilize our intuition. We get out of the computer kind of, out from under the computer and, connect with that person's body and their spirit and, just see what information comes through. So that's really helpful. And then we have a robust IV room where we use things like EBU and ozone and blood filtration, and we'll use intravenous light therapy, and we'll chelate or give really, sophisticated nutrients. And then, again, we love to work on the lymphatic system. So there's different equipment for that. There's also colonics, because that's a big area that is important to get, the colon to move, because especially when you're doing protocols, that is an area that can get blocked. Yeah. I'll refer to the, many of my friends, whether it's working on a trauma level and somebody needs family constellation or motion code or body code, or if they need to really work with a trauma and EMDR or, structural work. I don't do that Specifically, I'll do neural therapy, but I think structural work is so important these days to keep our, nervous system and our
Yeah.
craniosacral fluid and our lymphatic system flowing. So that's just like a snapshot of what we do. I'm sure I missed a lot, but that's just a little snapshot of kind of how we practice these days.
Wow, I mean, there is so much there that we could talk about all of those for another hour, probably. Um, I suppose if somebody's coming to see you, and let's say, I think the lymphatic part is an interesting
Yeah.
link to an autoimmune condition as well. But if somebody's coming to you, they've got swollen ankles, they've got issues going on with their ears and sinuses, they've got, their joints feel painful. Where
Yeah.
do you start with a client like that? And I suppose what can somebody do initially, or can somebody do like a body scan to think
Yeah.
about whether they have any of these issues and whether they need your support as well, or support in those ways?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like that case specifically, I would really kind of, I just kind of have the umbrella term, like that's like really looking at regulation. And my regulation therapies has increased since, COVID, especially,
Yeah.
and what I include, but it's identifying interference fields and focal infections and scars. It's also, it sounds like there's a sinus, infection, making sure people are not in a sick building or they're constantly being exposed by water damaged building. And then we work with the lymphatics and the fascia. And I also include, we work with the blood because everyone's blood is stickier now since COVID. So we really work on using proteolytic enzymes and supporting blood flow and disinflaming the blood vessels. And then the vagus nerve, a lot of people's vagus nerve is not optimally functioning, especially since spike protein is on top of everything else we were
Yeah.
dealing with. So I, look at vagus nerve infection and toxicity and how do we support getting the body in parasympathetic through things like B1 and choline, and then also sometimes vagus nerve simulators or the nicotine patch or things like that. And then I also do a lot of work with mast cells. Mast cells, I think, are really hypervigilant. They already were. And then I think COVID and 5G have been a really big trigger for people. And mast cells are our first alarm cell. And they live in these spaces where a lot of the things we're talking about live. So essentially they are in the connective tissue, they're in the lymphatics, they're around the nerves, they're around the blood vessels, they're in the gut, they're in the brain, all of these places. And they can become hypervigilant or overreactive, which can create inflammation in all of these tissues and create like that leakiness in the lymph or a lot of swelling in the body,
Yeah.
nausea, gut pain, brain fog, like all of these symptoms that are not just allergies. And so I also work a lot with that in the beginning too, because I find that if people's mast cells are not stabilized or supported, that it's really hard to treat people these days because they're more and more sensitive. So
Yeah.
those are kind of like the first steps. And I would check all of those boxes off first and see kind of where you get. And if you're like plateaued or you're overreacting or you're not really responding, then I would, again, I guess I would really just seek out a practitioner who really understands this.
Yeah. And is there some testing that you would do to help identify that? Because you've mentioned some really interesting points with the sticky blood. It might be worth explaining the spike protein as well, because some people might not understand the relevance of the spike protein, and also mast cells and like mast cell activation
Yeah,
syndrome, and how somebody can determine whether they're being
yeah,
impacted by that. Because these things, it's really what I just said to you in the case study that I gave you, is that there are symptoms that, it can affect your hands, and then suddenly you're getting headaches, and then you're getting an issue with your gut, and you don't realize they're all interconnected. So how
yeah,
do you bring that all together for the client?
yeah, absolutely. In the US, I often use just like a basic blood work panel through LabCorp, and
Yeah.
you do a lot of robust, labs. So we'll look at the immune system through a CBC and differential. The differential is important because you look at the type of percentages your white blood cells are, so that can give clues. We do a chem panel to look at liver and kidney and electrolyte function. We also look at, I can measure quantitatively a spike protein dilution number to give like a ballpark of how badly people have been impacted by spike protein. And then indirectly, we do a D-dimer and fibrinogen that can look at stickiness of the blood. Yeah. And then we can look at people's like cardiovascular risk factors, like the hemoglobin A1C and insulin and lipo-A and MR lipids and, also like ferritin and things like that. And that usually gives a pretty big overview, of course, thyroid and, all of that. But we look at, those markers, and then sometimes we'll jump into specialty tests, like we might use a total tox from Vibrant Labs, or we'll use an IGeneX panel for looking at Lyme and co-infections. Parasites are really hard to test for, but, sometimes we try to make that diagnosis. And then we will sometimes swab the sinuses to understand what's going on from a microbiome level. So we can look at bacteria or viruses, or we can do a fungal swab or biofilm, and that can be helpful too. And then I often have people work with a biological dentist to do a 3D cone beam so that they can look at if they have metals still in their mouth next to mercury, or mercury under a crown, or a root canal where that's not, healthy over time, or a place where a tooth was extracted and it has a pocket of necrotic bone that's kind of poisoning your lymphatics and circulatory system. So, all of this, really does help over time to really get good at pattern recognizing and to try to see what levers you need to move first, of course. And then a lot of medicine is, clinical, right? Just clinical observation and this bridge of bringing science and your intuition to support somebody. Those are a really good place to start. If you haven't done that on your journey, I would really encourage you to.
And where would somebody start with that if there's somebody listening today and they are just looking to take their first steps, or they've been living with a condition for a while and want to make some meaningful changes? What would you recommend?
Yeah, a good question. There's so many, right? Again, the basics, right? Clean food, clean water, clean air. So try to make sure you're not living in a moldy home. If you are, work with people who know how to do this and don't dismiss you or take advantage of you, right? And then, air filtration can be very good in your home. Definitely filtering your water. Our water is becoming, more and more impacted. In the U.S., we have fluoride. We can have glyphosate show up in our water. Like we can have lack of minerals, we can have metals, we can have protozoa, all of these things. So getting a really good water filter is important. Trying to avoid genetically modified or mRNA injected foods is really important. It's getting harder and harder to do that, but trying your best. Not living in fear, of course, because that can be, when we're too rigid, that can create inflexibility in our whole system as well. And then I would say from, often I do things to support the vagus nerve. I get the blood moving with enzymes like lumbrokinase or serrapeptase or nattokinase. Do lymphatic therapies. You can do a lot at home. Not only drinking good water is going to be a start, but moving, even if, you're not feeling good, just whatever movement you can do. There's also these vibration wands that you can buy that can vibrate your lymph, for vibration plates or dry skin brushing. That can be very helpful. And, again, that can be helpful. And then I always use binders like fulvic and humic acid, or modified citrus pectin, or chlorella, or clean sources of zeolite. That can really capture what's coming out of the bile and make sure that's not getting recirculated. And then mast cell stabilization can be anything from DAO enzyme to quercetin to compounded mast cell stabilizers, peptides. I've been using a lot of GLP-1s as well. I've been microdosing them, not macrodosing them. My friend, Dr. Tina Moore, really taught me this. GLP-1s really have this profound signaling in the body and on our immune cells and our brain. And our, mast cells, our microglia, our astrocytes. So a lot of the places where we are overstimulated, GLP-1s can, most of my patients, if I will microdose them, so weight loss doses are 2.4 milligrams once a week. Microdoses are 0.05 milligrams, so completely different substance. And it's endogenous. We naturally produce it. So it's not a foreign peptide we're trying to, just have a fad and, use. It actually is made in our brainstem and our gut microbiome. And when you're sick, a lot of these things go wrong. So a lot of my patients feel less pain, less inflammation. They feel more sturdy and steady and not as reactive. And so that's been a surprisingly really fun tool to use.
Okay.
Yeah, so I really like that.
And when did you start bringing that into your practice then? Was it recently?
Yeah, about a year ago. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, about a year ago.
And you're
Yeah.
seeing some really good results?
Yeah. Again, everyone's different, but most of my patients have, probably a reduction in capacity of their GLP-1 receptors or production naturally. And I think this is like a really elegant mechanism. If you kind of research GLP-1 and like anything that you're trying to really move, especially cognitively, cardiometabolically, and inflammatory, there is definitely a mechanism that you can, really tune into and see if it's good for you. Yeah. If you do the low doses, you don't get the side effects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's been such an interesting discussion, and I cannot believe that we are nearly up on time, which is such a shame. And I will have to have you back on because you have so much to share.
I'd love to.
But if somebody has just been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition and they're feeling a bit lost, where would you start? Are there any resources or any things that somebody can do maybe after they've listened to this podcast that's going to help them feel that little bit better?
Yeah, absolutely. There's, again, so many places to start, but from my perspective, I would really just take a moment to get quiet every day and to start listening to your system and really starting to believe that you can get better and starting aligning with the right people and the right information at the right time. And so when you get, quiet within yourself and you get, again, starting to trust that you can get better, the right people show up in your life. And so I just want to, empower you in that. But I would, just take a look at all the great information out there, really try to find people that you resonate, create community where you can, if there's a support group locally or online. That can be really helpful to feel like you're not alone. And then take a step. I would definitely not do this alone. Find a practitioner or group program that's going to work for you, because it's really hard to heal by yourself, and you need experts and supportive people around you to really embark on this journey.
Yeah, that's great advice. And on that point, where can everybody find more information about what you do and get in contact with you? Where's the best place?
Yeah, so a good place would be drchristineschaffner.com. Yeah, that would be a great place to start. And I'm happy to help. I see patients from all over the world, and I know you do too. And so, I'm always a resource.
And you share lots of information on your podcast as well, don't you?
Yeah, I love to do that. Yeah, I always learn.
Thanks so much for being on the podcast today. I know this information will be so valuable to my listeners. So thanks again, and I hope to catch up with you again sometime soon.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for joining me today on the Autoimmune Reset. I really hope you enjoyed the discussion, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode. And if you liked it, I would hugely appreciate a review on iTunes, as it helps me understand what you like about the podcast and to help share the information with more people. I'm excited to speak to you next time. And remember, you have the power to take the reins on your health. So keep the faith and celebrate the small wins. Until next time.